Hey guys, it's Bear with the Gimpy Camper. On this week's episode of What the Crap Am I Doing to My Camper? It's in for a doozy. You're going to learn why I think you might want to at least weigh your options when you're looking at an ultralight camper, because this is the kind of mess that you might get into. I will say that later models of the Jayco Jayfeather do now use Asdel on the front cap. I wish they would use it all over the place. But I know I read the front and I think the rear cap as well, which is usually where you have more of your water intrusion. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. However, before we take a turn in the right direction, we've got to step back and take 3 turns in the wrong direction. This thing was just horrible. I was planning on just gluing this fiberglass back down, and it basically fell off everywhere except for right around the window here. It's important to note that when you're taking fiberglass off like this, it's important to have a helper. I underestimated that, and because of that I have a few rips in the fiberglass. Then I tried to take all this substrate off that I could. I thought it was Luon. I'm not real sure what it is. It was really thin, probably 1/8 of an inch or less, and I didn't really see any wood fibers in there. It was all like cardboard. Even around the window where it didn't really have any water damage, it just peeled up, basically like tearing a box. So the wet areas came off pretty easy, but there in that center, I did go back with a scraper and even a scraper on the oscillating tool trying to tear it off, but it just kept getting into the styrofoam. So then in order to give the new wood more water resistance, I went over it with some good primer. This is Kiehl's brand. It's a fairly good product from what I understand. So I just wanted to have a little bit of extra water protection there. Then I thought, no big deal, let's put this plywood on. It curved over the curves fairly easily, so we can put this on there and screw it down. But that's where we run into obstacle number 1. That's where the structural integrity of this ultralight camper comes in. So all this you see that's brown around the window, there's no cross members in that. And there's only 2 above the window. So there's one about 1 foot above the window, and there's one on around the top of the curve. So plan A was to start with this piece of plywood at the top and screw it down and then bend it down to the window. That didn't work. There was just too much resistance for what little bit it had to grab a hold of at the top. So then I thought, well, let's do it by the window and then we can bend it down over the top. That was plan B. Plan B didn't work either. So then I decided to go ahead and cut out the window, because I thought if I cut out the window I'd have more places to clamp it to help it hold down to the contact cement and hopefully get a better bond. That didn't work out so well either. So we went with 3M90 spray. I had somebody recommend that did RV roofs to use that on the TPO and glue it back down to the top where I'd replace the wood. So I thought, I'd probably get a better bond this way than with the epoxy, since we're doing the whole sheet of plywood and fiberglass, but that didn't end up being the case. At this point, my goal was to let the top dry to the window and then be able to fold it down, which didn't work. And then I thought we'll do the bottom piece, and that way we can go ahead and bend it over because there's more aluminum there to screw to, and that'll be a lot easier. Again, this was false hope. It was just really too much of a bend at the bottom with no support at the bottom of the board. There was about a 6-inch piece at the bottom where they overlapped, and we'll show you a picture of that here, and there was just nothing there to screw it to. So at the end of the day we started to have something that resembled a camper, but you can see at this bottom piece where we was trying to screw it in the vertical cross member, it just wasn't going to cut it. So then I tore everything off and we're just going to start completely over. But the question is how can we make this better than new? I had kind of an idea of how we could do it, but it was kind of out there, so just roll with me here. So this whole top area where the curve is at the top of the camper, it was just styrofoam there. So I thought we had to have something there to screw down the plywood so that it helps make that curve. So I had this bright idea to use some 2x4s. This curved piece was the only nailer that there was on the whole top area, and it was on both sides, so I had to recreate that and try to take it all the way across. So the first thing we had to do is use the table saw to rip down the side of the 2x4 so it's thin enough to fit at the bottom because it was more narrow. and then we had to use it to cut an angle at the bottom of the 2x4 so it would gradually roll. And this wouldn't give us the shape that we needed, but it would be a lot closer. So after a good long hard day's worth of work, I got it about halfway on, posted a picture on a Facebook group, and somebody says, "Wait a minute, you can't use pressure treated wood against aluminum, it'll cause corrosion." Never heard that before in my life. I looked it up, apparently it's true, so have to start over again. But I'm not going to be redundant and make you watch me tear it down and build it back again, because it's virtually the same thing. Now the way that we're doing this for strength, it's got 2 screws in the side of every board, and then there's wood glue, which is stronger than screws if you didn't know that, connecting the boards together, as well as pocket screws. If you don't know what pocket screws are, you know, it's a little screw that's at an angle where it helps join the boards together. So these are epoxy coated screws. They're weatherproof. They should be great for this application. It holds the boards really tight while the glue dries. So this is basically the rough end of the arch. As you can see, the corners aren't very smooth, but we're going to have to go back over that with a planer and sand it down. Then after we got it fairly smooth, we wanted to go back and weatherproof it as much as possible, so we went back and put some primer on there. Then after we put the primer on there, we put some Bondo to help fill in some of those holes and help get it just a little bit more round up there. And of course, then you got to sand the Bondo down. When you sand the Bondo down, then some of the primer comes off, so then you got to go back and you got to put more primer on there. Then we took a few minutes and blowed off all the sawdust with our handy dandy shop vac. Then we decided to go put a little bit of primer on that cardboard substance. Maybe it'll help the glue hold better this time. Spoiler alert, it didn't help at all. So this time we decided to go with epoxy. Now this epoxy that I have has a good long working time. So let us just put it on there and put the plywood on before it starts setting up too much. So I started putting screws in the bottom of this piece of plywood, and my goal was to just curve it around the top and bend it over. But it just still was hard to do. It didn't really work out that well. And again, the bottom 1.5 feet of this plywood doesn't have anything to screw to except for the outside. So we did use our 2x4s with our clamps through the window opening to hold that in hopes that the epoxy would hold it down. And it didn't do a very good job. So then we had 2 sections of rope that were 100 foot long that we wrapped all the way around the camper and used ratchet straps to try to ratchet it down. It didn't really help that much. It put too much pressure on the bottom of the camper to make me comfortable, considering it's where the gas lines, and it was hitting the black tank valve, and I was just really nervous about it, and it didn't really help that much. But by taking my time and using some muscle, I was able to get it down just by, going along those 2x4s that I had on the top and just getting a little bit to bite and just working it back every couple of inches that way. Now that we have the top figured out, now we gotta go back to that bottom piece because there's nothing to screw to on the bottom of that bottom piece of plywood. So what I decided to do is basically make some dado cuts in the 2x4 so that it sits behind the vertical cross members and attaches that way. And the problem that I had with that is I had to cut so much out for that aluminum cross member there wasn't too much of the 2x4 left. So I did laminate it with another piece to the back of it, which was probably about 3/8 of an inch thick, and that was left over from ripping the sides off one of the 2x4s earlier. And again, this didn't really work out too well with getting that bottom piece to curve all the way down, so I had to use a couple of 2x4s that I had laying around for some leverage, and that seemed to work out pretty well. Okay guys, so thanks for watching. This video is pretty long, so I'm going to split it up into a second video, putting the fiberglass back on. I'm pretty happy with the results up till now. You'll have to stick around and come back next week to watch the rest of the video and see how much of a major disaster it turns out to be. If you like the videos, click the subscribe button, click the thumbs up. Thanks a lot. See you guys around.